From the foothills of Colorado, welcome to Raiders in 30, the podcast for the thinking fan. We are just coming off the draft, and I've got to say, something pretty amazing happened at the draft. There's something I've learned that honestly I just didn't know. I didn't think this was possible, but we found it out. We found out that several people in the media, most of the media in fact, as well as quite a bit of the Raider fan base, maybe not quite a bit, but at least a decent chunk, they have a special ability. And it's ability that I didn't think existed. It was something, for me that maybe this just happens in movies, maybe you get a superpower. But it is amazing, and I'll tell you what it is. It is the ability to read minds. The media, segments of the fan base can read minds, and I'll tell you why they can read minds, or I'll tell you how I know it, because they actually said it straight up. They told us David Arnett at 19 was a pick that we could have gotten in the second or maybe even third round. We could have waited on him. We could have got him anytime we wanted. Why would we not trade back and just get him at pick 40, pick 50 when it was easy to scoop him up there? Just as easy, in fact, as it was at 19. Unfortunately for Mike Mack and Jon Gruden and I guess the rest of the fan base, we do not have this mind-reading ability, and therefore he just didn't know that, so he said, whatever, I'm going to go get my guy. And I'm going to go ahead and say, thank God Mayock doesn't have that ability because I'm pretty happy with the Arnett pick. We're going to talk about each of the picks. This week we're going to talk about the draft and the picks and why they're exactly what this team needed. Next we're going to talk about the roster and just really the idea of how bad this roster was when Jon Gruden got here. And because this draft got me thinking about that. And lastly, we're going to do a fun little exercise. We're going to take the weapons we got this year, we're going to throw them on last year's team, and we're going to see what happened. But first, let's talk about the draft. The draft has now become something, I got to say, the past couple years, what a difference. Because I love the draft. People in the past, people throw Super Bowl parties. In the past, I'm a guy, I used to throw draft parties. I remember the draft used to be all day Saturday and then Sunday. Rounds 1 to 4 Saturday, started at noon on the East Coast, and I'd get everybody over, we'd fire up the grill, I'd go nuts, I'd have more food at a draft party than anyone ever had at a Super Bowl party. And it's something I love. Love the draft, love going back, reading about drafts. When they changed to the new format, not going to lie, I was a little worried I wasn't going to like it. But I mean, hey, what's not to love? Now we get a first round Friday, we get 2 and 3 first round Thursday, 2 and 3 Friday, and then we still get some action Saturday. But these last two drafts have been especially entertaining, and they've been especially fun as a Raider fan. I don't have to go over the just absolute failure that we had for 15 years since that Super Bowl run. Al Davis, he had it for decades, didn't have it after the Super Bowl. Reggie McKenzie had one good draft in every one of those picks he made, or at least the first 3 picks he made. Mack, Carr, Gabe Jackson, those were all gifts. At the end of the day, he saw a $100 bill at his foot and he bent down and picked it up. And you know what? He does deserve credit for that because I'm not joking when I say this. Some people don't have the ability to just pick up the free money that's in front of them. And look, plenty of GMs have proven that. But at the end of the day, McKenzie wasn't getting it done. You can just go through and just see the wasted picks over the years. I was actually thinking of reading off a list, and I'm not joking with you. I wrote the list down, I put it in front of me, and I read it, and I said, this is too damn depressing, and I want to be excited about this draft, so I'm not even going to do it. What I can tell you is this. We know how successful last year's draft was. Don't have to discuss that. The picks we made this year are exactly the type of picks that this team needed. These are guys that are going to fit right in for what we're trying to do. Starting with Henry Ruggs. This was obviously controversial among some of the fan base. Now, in my mock draft, you saw that I had us trading back in the first and going receiver later. I also prefaced that by saying, what the hell do I know? I'm no GM. And we found out I was right. But outside of the podcast, when the question was being asked, of these 3 wide receivers, if we do take one of them, who do you want? Ruggs was the guy that I felt I liked, and that was solely based off the arguments I had heard for Ruggs from people, who were supporting him, people on websites, on the subs, everything like that. Ruggs is a guy who, he's not just speed. We got too many people flashing back to Darius Hayward-Bay, and look, I get it. We had a lot of years of bad picks. I can understand people seeing that and being like, no, don't just take the speed guy. But we know that Ruggs is more than a speed guy. I'm not going to break down every pick because there's 3,000 shows that have broken down every Raiders pick and what their strengths and weaknesses are. We don't need to do that. The point I want to make on the picks is, what is it that the Raiders needed? Well, the Raiders needed speed. Okay, we don't have speed in our wide receiver group. That's, we got a physical receiver in Ty Williams, and he can get down there. But, he's not a speedster. Renfro, slot guy, unbelievable. Aguilar brought it, same thing, slot guy. He's not a speedster. If you talk to Philly fans, they'll tell you, no, the problem with Aguilar is we wanted him to be the guy stretching the field, and that's not what he is. So I hope we're not going to use him in that way. Ruggs is a guy who can stretch the field, but it's not just that. Ruggs is also a guy that you can dump off a 3-yard slant to, and he's going to turn 3 yards into 30 yards, into 50 yards, into a touchdown. He's a guy you can dial up a wide receiver screen and actually go somewhere with it. You can dial up an end around. He's a guy that you can say, okay, we're going to put you on the outside, just sprint forward, take a cornerback and maybe a safety with you, and while you're doing that, we've got this little design play for Waller. We're going to dump it off to him on the other side. You can fake an end around to him. He burnt you on the end around before. You're getting nervous. We're going to fake it, and then Jacobs is going to take off the other way. There's a lot of things you can do with a guy with that kind of speed, and a physical guy, and a guy who can catch the ball. Ruggs is, I feel very good about the Ruggs pick. Arnett, we talked about him before. Of all the picks, this was obviously the most interesting. And the other picks we'll talk about a little bit. But Arnett was a guy who, when we picked him, I'm not going to lie, I said, wow, I wasn't really ready for this. Let me check this guy out. And then I check him out and I realize he led the nation in passer rating on single coverage. He played with a broken wrist or broken hand most of the year. Mayock and Gruden, this is the thing I love. Mayock and Gruden, when talking about this guy, said, we think he's as good as Okudah. And here's the thing. A lot of people hear that and they just go nuts. And why do they go nuts? Well, because that's not what the mock draft said. That's not what the experts said. But let me ask you, if Mayock and Gruden spend as much time as they do watching tape, if they spent the time they do visiting schools, talking to coaches, talking to players, watching them, it's probably worth trusting them when they say, look, based on what we're seeing on the screen, I say this guy's as good. He's got similar skills. Gruden said he thinks he's the best tackler in the league. And as soon as I read that quote from him, I just got so many flashbacks. How many times do you remember, and I'm specifically thinking of Gary and Conley when I say this, how many times do you think of a receiver just catching a little 3-yard out against us and we just miss the tackle and then it's a 30 or 40 or 50-yard gain? A cornerback that can tackle is frankly kind of a rare thing. It's nice to have him on board. But here's somebody who Mayock said, I've spoken with the kid a bunch of times. I know him. I feel good about him. I feel like he's someone I know and someone I trust. That's the kind of research. We didn't get those answers from Rich and McKenzie. When McKenzie would make a pick and maybe we weren't sure about it, or whoever was making the picks in the last 15 years, what we'd get from them is, we feel good about it. But we wouldn't get that little extra. We wouldn't get that, hey, I met with this kid a number of times. I talked to his coaches. I talked to his schools. I've watched this. I watched that. We interviewed him several times. I talked to him outside of the interview. And that's the stuff we get from Mayock and Gruden. And if they're telling us that they think this guy's as good as Okudah, then he's worth at least giving a shot. You look at the rest of our picks. Bowden, just an all-around weapon, a guy we're probably going to run some wildcat formations out of, maybe a Taysom Hill type, someone you have in there who you know what, he can take off with the ball. Carr can run, he doesn't do it enough. I've said that about Carr. I'd like to see him take off more. But here's a guy that we're going to bring in. I have a feeling we're going to use him as sort of like a Taysom Hill. And I mean, that's not really an original thought. A lot of people have said that. But the point is, we added somebody who can just do a little of everything. We added Edwards, just another wide receiver, and someone who, look, it's pretty obvious with who we drafted that we're building this thing around Carr. So any rumors about Carr out the door, you can probably put that to bed. I'm going to go on record right now as saying we're going to end up extending Carr this year. Then we get a couple of defensive pieces later. Muse. Here's a guy, a Swiss Army knife type that we can just kind of plug in anywhere. We can put him all over the field, and we can limit his snaps. He's not a guy who's going to be in there, 40, 50 plays a game. But if this guy's in there for 20 snaps, and we use him and say, what are his strengths, and let's just use those strengths and utilize it on 15, 20 plays a game, that's the kind of guy that we could use right now. Meek Robertson, another guy. So this guy, people are saying, is the steal of the draft, that this was the best slot corner in the draft. I got to tell you, with what we did in free agency, and then adding guys like this, adding a Muse, adding a guy like Robertson, who apparently just one of the best slot corners you could have picked, I'm telling you, we're ready for the Chiefs. We are ready for them to come into town. We're ready to go to Kansas City and compete with them. Who knows what's going to happen this year? I can't guarantee victories. I can't guarantee Super Bowls. Here's what I can guarantee. That 40-9 score, that's not happening this year. The 4 touchdowns in 7 minutes in the second quarter, all on 50-yard bombs, that's not happening this year. We have plugged those holes. Those things are not going to happen. And we did it by saying, instead of, we got to draft 7, 8 superstars, we said, no, we need to draft guys that we can plug in to do the things we need to do in the way we want to do them, and that's what they did. And don't think I forgot about Simpson. Very solid guard. Who knows? Look, maybe Gabe Jackson sticks around the year. Maybe at the end of the years when we cut ties, we plug in Simpson. I don't know. The only thing we didn't do at the draft that I wish we did is none of us want Brandon Parker in there as a backup tackle. Okay, all of us want to move on from that. So I hope they address that, maybe, grab a veteran before the season gets going and let Parker go. And it's interesting we bring up Parker because that gets to the next point. That point is depth. And I think when I look at last year, I think the biggest weakness we had wasn't necessarily wide receiver. It wasn't necessarily cornerback. It wasn't necessarily safety, especially after Abram went down. I truly thought that our biggest weakness last year was a lack of depth. Think of this. Think of everything we did last year in free agency. Think of the pickups we made. Then think about the 2019 draft. Think about I think 9 starters we said came from that draft. Imagine everything we did last offseason and then realize we went into this year and we still did not have any depth. We had nothing beyond level 1. And that level 1 was still lacking at key positions. We were still missing wide receiver. We were still missing cornerback. There was so much that we were missing. And when you think about, you went out and you signed a guy like Joyner, and he's been up and down. We can talk about that. But you signed a Joyner, you signed a Trent Brown, you signed a Ty Williams. You think about signing these guys. You get Darren Waller on the team, and you just realize to do that and to draft the guys we did, and to still say, well, this team has absolutely no depth, that tells you that when Gruden got here, there was nothing on this team. There was nothing whatsoever. And I'm saying this, we've talked about Khalil Mack. We did that last week. I'm going on record again saying this right now. I'm doing a lot of on the record this week. I'm going on record saying, thank God he traded Khalil Mack. And that's no knock on Mack. It's a knock on just how limited this roster was and how much those picks, what they turned into, the cash that was freed up. Same with Amari Cooper. You know what we don't need right now? We didn't need Amari Cooper on the team at $100 million. We're set at the wide receiver position now. There's no excuse this year. But the lack of depth that we exhibited was unbelievable. I mean, let's look at a couple things. Look, Hunter Renfrow last year, he takes that hit in the Jets game, and he goes down. And he stayed in the Jets game the rest of the way, but when I talk about it, I always say in reality he missed 3.5, 4 games. And the reason I say it, he had no business staying in the Jets game. He was a non-factor the rest of the way. We should not have had him in there. So he essentially missed 4 games, and we've talked about this. We went 0-4 in those games. Maybe he wouldn't have made all the difference. There was one of the games, I think he was out for the Jags game, and I'm sure that he would have made a difference there. But nonetheless, here's the point. When Renfrow went down, we all said, every one of us were like, oh my God, our wide receiver group is in shambles now. Think about that. Think about the fact that when a 5th-round rookie wide receiver went down with an injury, we said, well, our wide receiver group that's it, they're done. That doesn't tell you that Hunter Renfrow is an absolute stud. And I love Renfrow. Every one of us loves Renfrow. But that's not that Renfrow is such a stud that without him, my God, there's nothing we can do. We're in ruins. That just shows you how light our receiving group was. And that's why you go out, and that's why you draft Ruggs. And then that's why you go ahead and say, hey, you know what, we got Ruggs, but let's also get Bowden. Hey, you know what, let's also go get Edwards. Let's go out and let's get these guys. And think about it on the other side of the ball, too. Burfict going down, Burfict being suspended. We had, look, our linebacker group wasn't even good when he was there, but he goes down, and when I say we had 0 linebackers, if we had drafted, if at pick 19 we had taken Kenneth Murray, or Patrick Queen said, and people said, whoa, these guys just signed Littleton, they just signed Queen, and then they're going to go out and get another linebacker. I don't think anyone and any Raider fan, I don't think any of us would have been upset because we understand just how bad that linebacker position has been for a long time now. I've made this reference before. The last Raider linebacker I ever felt really good about was Greg Biekert. He was a 7th round pick, and his last year I think was the year we made the Super Bowl. Biekert, for anyone who doesn't remember, or again for younger fans, Biekert was the guy who hit Brady and caused the fumble in the Snow Bowl game, and he was great. But since then, we haven't felt good about the linebacker position at all. And obviously, we made great improvements this year, and we're all excited to see it. However, talking about Burfict here, when he went down, we watched games and most people realized. You had a couple of your geniuses who said it was just Gunther's scheme, because apparently as long as you scheme correctly, you can put me, my wife, and the postman outside right now. You can take the three of us, put it in there, and we're supposed to do pretty well. Not really how it works. That hasn't seeped down to a lot of people yet, but it is what it is. Whatever you think of Gunther, I'm not saying you have to love Gunther, but what I'm saying is Gunther could have schemed anything he wanted. He could have you could have put Bill Belichick in here and put him in charge of the linebacker group, and you know what? It wasn't going to do a thing because we didn't have that talent. How about the O-line depth last year? And we had, anytime we were missing someone, we already talked about Trent Brown being out, and then just possibly the worst backup tackle in the league, Brandon Parker, just having no business being in there. And again, I hope we do something about that. But even, look, Gabe Jackson was out, and Denzel Good did an all right job. But then at one point, we also were without Incognito for a little while. We had trouble filling in that spot. Hudson was out for a little while, and we had the undrafted rookie free agent, and he did a good job. Look, for an undrafted rookie free agent, or I don't know if he was a rookie, but he was an undrafted free agent. He did a good job as well. But at the end of the day, it just showed, my God, if we have anyone on this line out for an extended period of time, we're light in the backups. And it's funny because a lot of people talked about trading Gabe Jackson, and it might still happen, and maybe it would have been a good move. But I was one of the guys saying, all right, trade him. Oh, we got Simpson, trade him. And people made a couple good points, which is, hey, why not why not just let him play out this year? We've got the cap space. He's not eating up anything right now that we need. But number two is, okay, you take him out. Maybe you think, Denzel Good's enough to put in there. Maybe you think that Simpson, who we just drafted, maybe he's good. But the problem is what happens when one of those guys goes down? And that's a pretty good question. So depth on the O-line is something we still need another tackle, in my opinion. But frankly, we've done much better with it. We addressed it in the draft, and I'm pretty excited to have Simpson going forward. But the point of all this, really think about how light this roster was when Jon Gruden got here, and then realize how amazing of a job that him and Mack have done now heading into year 3. Because I'll tell you this, nobody in that locker room, that's a guess, but I feel pretty confident saying it, nobody in that locker room and nobody among the fan base, at least maybe a few people, there's always going to be a few on the outside, nobody's worried about depth right now. I'm not saying we couldn't plug in a few more pieces. You could always use more talent. Roster's going to 55 this year, that's a good thing. But nobody is really sweating depth now. We have depth at every single position. There might be a couple positions where you're saying, I wish we had a little more talent here. Maybe I wish the guy we had starting here, I wish we had a better starter. Hey, maybe there's something to be said for that. We'll see how it plays out. And frankly, we don't even know where a lot of guys are going to end up playing position-wise. Joyner, I hope they move Joyner back to safety, and maybe the fact that they went out and got Muse and they can plug him in to play a few positions, or again, they go out and they get Robertson, and he's supposed to be a great slot corner. These are a couple guys that maybe they can put Joyner back at safety, and they can let those guys, handle the load here and there. We don't know. We just don't know where everyone's going to be playing yet. But here's what we do know. This team no longer has holes. It might have positions you want to improve, and you can always get better. Always strive to get better, nothing wrong with that. We don't have a hole on the D-line. Our pass rush, we don't have a hole. We don't have a hole at linebacker. We don't have holes in the secondary. We have young guys, and of course we've got to see how they perform. But we don't have holes there. We don't have holes on O-line, save for I think we need one more backup tackle. We don't have a hole at running back. There's no holes at the tight end. There's no holes at wide receiver. That excuse is gone forever. And there's no hole at quarterback. We are a complete team. And this team, a lot of people, are tempering expectations. Hey, let's not go too crazy. And I've seen some predictions. Hopefully the Raiders can go like 8-8, 9-7. I'm here to tell you, and this is going to tie into the end, I'm here to tell you that this team is a double-digit win team. And I don't just mean 10-6. I mean this team has 11-5, 12-4 potential. And not only that, I think if you look, and this brings us to our last point here, if you look at last year's team, and look at the record and look at the games, 7-9, you know the wins, you know the losses, I don't have to recap them for you. Here's a little thought experiment I want to do. I want to take away the following players from the 2019 roster. I want to take away Zay Jones, I want to take away Keelan Doss, and I want to take away Rico Gafford. We're taking those guys off the team and we're replacing them with the following. We're replacing them with Ruggs, we're replacing them with Bowden, we're replacing them with Edwards. All right, and these are three guys, we haven't seen them at the NFL level yet, but I don't think anyone is listening to this podcast right now saying, oh, let's pump the brakes. There's no reason to dump Keelan Doss, and just plug in Bowden. We have to see first. Everyone here would rather have the three players we drafted than the three wide receivers I just named. So as a little thought experiment, let's do this. Let's think about last year, let's remove those guys, and let's plug in these three guys. And we went 7-9 last year. And there were some games where we just got flat out blown out. We got blown out by the Jets, and in a game nobody saw coming. That was a very weird one. But it happened. What can you do? We got blown out by the Chiefs, especially in the second game, the 40-9 game, which, when Mahomes threw across his body and I forget who should have made the easiest interception ever. An interception that a schlub like me would have made. And he just dropped it. And I know it was windy. I'm not trying to give the guy a hard time. But as soon as you saw that, you knew it wasn't going to be our day. There's blowouts you can talk about. But I want to specifically focus on three games. I want to talk about the Texans game. I want to talk about the Jags game. And I want to talk about the second Broncos game. Looking at those three games, and it's funny to think about that Broncos game now because at the time I was very much, look, you don't play games to lose. Try to go out and win the game. But in retrospect, losing that game and then picking ahead of the Broncos, I was probably pretty happy that we ended up with that result. But let's look at those games. That Texans game, we lost by 3. It was, 27-24. And in that game, our defense just struggled down the stretch, and obviously we let Watson have that drive at the end. And I don't remember every detail from that game. I remember the drive at the end. I remember Watson had the eye issue. I remember Gary and Conley mugging one of our guys and not getting a pass interference call, and I'm just laughing thinking, okay, well, if he did half of that last week when he was on the team, it would have been PI, but that's another story. I remember Renfro's touchdown, of course, when he broke away. I remember a few things, but I don't remember the specifics. But here's what I still feel comfortable saying. Even not remembering the specifics, the exacts of the game, I feel comfortable saying this. If you plug in these players that I just named, just the 3 wide receivers, 2 wide receivers, 1 running back / quarterback / receiver, if you plug those guys in, do you think we score another 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points, on a Texans team that really didn't have that impressive of a defense? If we went in there with the team we had and we lost by 3, do you think we probably would have been able to put up the 4 points needed with these guys that we probably could have gone ahead and won that game? What about the Jags game? Everyone remembers that. Very disappointing game. And the big thing on the Jags game was just we just didn't score. The defense actually did pretty well. They got beat up on that drive at the end. But we couldn't score. We couldn't put it in the end zone. We couldn't seem to drive down the field. A lot of people wanted to blame Carr. I don't feel that way. I know most of you don't either. And I believe this is one of the games that Renfro missed. And when you look at that game and you figure, okay, we lost, I think it was 20-16, 16 points. Do you think if instead of he was throwing to Rico Gafford, Keelan Doss, if he had Ruggs on the field there, you think we might have scored a few more points on the Jags? What about the Broncos game? The end of the year, the Broncos game where we lost by 1. That was a great game where Renfro and Engel both scored pretty clear touchdowns, but somehow neither one of them counted. What can you do? Again, in retrospect, probably better that we lost that game. At the time, I didn't feel that way, of course. But we lost that game by 1 point. And I think, this is from memory, I feel like the final score of that game was 16-15, because I think we went for 2 at the end. We didn't get it, obviously. But it was 16-15. We lost by 1. to a Broncos team that's pretty weak, and frankly, to a Broncos team I'm not that scared of going into this year. I know some people are worried. Some people think they had a great draft, and I think next week, maybe we'll look at the other teams in the division. We'll see how we stack up there. That could be something we discuss for sure. We lost that game by 1 point. If we had these weapons, these three players, and I'm only talking about these three, and there's a reason I'm only mentioning them. Do you think we might have been able to score another couple points on the Broncos to win that game? My opinion is all three of these games are wins. They're Raider wins. If we just take these three wide receivers that we gained in this draft and we plug them in place of the three guys I mentioned who really just had no business being on the team. If we do that, we win those games and now we're 10-6. We're a 10-6 playoff team. And honestly, with the talent we had last year, probably don't make it far in the playoffs, and we had some work to do. Now, think of everything else we did in addition to those three wide receivers I just named. I didn't even talk about the addition of Corey Littleton, or the addition of Quee, or the addition of Collins Nassib, everything we added on defense. I didn't talk about that. I didn't talk about the other guys we drafted. I didn't talk about plugging Arnett at corner. I didn't talk about having guys like Muse and Robertson coming in there and just getting their 20 snaps a game and making a couple of big plays a game. I didn't even include those guys when I talked about this. So here's the thing. If it's fair to say that taking the three drafted wide receivers and replacing them on last year's team got us to 10-6, and I think it is. I'm willing to hear other arguments, but at the end of the day, when you're talking about 3 games that we lost by a combined 8 points, to me, it's a pretty fair statement to say if we had that level of talent at wide receiver, those guys in place, that we probably would have pulled those games off. So if we could have gone 10-6 last year with that, what about this year? What about when our 9 rookie starters all are a year older? They have some experience in the league now. What about when we're adding these talented pieces we just drafted? What about when we're adding a guy like Littleton who, it can't be overstated that Littleton, what an impact he's going to have. It can't be overstated that what's amazing? Quee is a guy that we're not even talking about him enough because of how excited we are about Littleton. And that's fair. I understand it. But we went from the worst linebacker group in football to having 2 damn good linebackers. We went from having a glaring weakness at corner to hopefully filling that with Arnett. We went from having no depth whatsoever to having quite a bit of depth on this team. We went from very limited offensive playmakers where we were putting everything on a 5th-round rookie wide receiver. And of course we had Jacobs, but I'm talking about the wide receiver group right now. We went from that to where we're standing now. Think of everything we added. Think of the depth. Think of the playmakers. Think of the leaders. Think of the defensive talent we added. And then think about this. If we could have gone 10-6 last year with just those wide receivers, what can we do this year with everyone, with the rookies having another year of experience, with these kind of weapons around Carr, with these kind of defensive weapons, with 2 cornerbacks we believe in, with a pretty damn deep safety group, with hopefully a healthy Jonathan Abram? With Derek Carr having year 3 of a system for the first time in his career, knowing all of that, how can you look at this Raider team and say, and look, nobody can predict the future. We talked about that at the beginning. I can't read minds. You can't read minds. We don't know what's going to happen. But I can say this confidently. If this team does not see double-digit wins, then it's a disappointing season. Because this team has the talent not just to go 10-6. This team has talent to go 11-5. This team has talent to go 12-4. Will they do it? That's what we're going to wait to find out. I'll see you all next week. We're going to be back. I'm going to have 3 fresh new topics for you. We're going to have a great time. As always, thanks for tuning in. It's only episode 3, but I got to tell you, I'm having a blast doing this. The feedback has been fantastic. I appreciate the support from everyone. And as long as you keep listening, I'm going to keep doing it. Thank you so much. This has been Raiders in 30, the podcast for the thinking fan from the foothills of Colorado. I'm Brian. Love you all. Stay safe. We'll talk soon.